In today's video, I'll be going over exactly when and where I'll be looking to buy some Bitcoin action in the month of June as we do revisit some of these June statistics, looking at one, just the average rate of return for June's, plus, whether June was likely to close positive or negatively, and then also the date in which the low of the month typically happened. And then, of course, extrapolating from there, we're going to be looking at the differential between the open of June and then the low of the June to come up with areas of interest for potentially a buy in June. So as you can see here on the chart, I have marked off each and every past June, which is where I draw this data from, and we can just jump right into the results right here, right now. So here is the work, and you can see that out of 15 prior Junes, only 8 of those have closed positively. So it is certainly one of the lesser likely months to close positively. Just over 53.33% of all Junes closing positively. And that's repeated, of course, as well. And I should note here that the average win and the average loss actually starting to look pretty uniform across a lot of these summer months. The average win for June, so for the Junes that did close positively, on average, they returned about 25%. The median actually coming in exactly at 25%, which I thought was rather interesting. And then on the other side, we can look at the average loss. This one losing on average 15.5% for those negative closing Junes, and the median a little bit lower there, just under 11%. So I'm going to assume now that Bitcoin is going to close somewhere here, basically, by the end of May. So we only got realistically, it's another 2 days left of trading until the official end of May. But, typically, whatever CME closes at on Friday is going to be essentially the same closing price that we're going to get when CME is not trading on Saturday. So I'm just going to assume it's going to be somewhere around here. Again, if you're watching this or if you are coming back in June, you'll know the actual closing price of May. So this could perhaps be a little bit more accurate. But we'll start off with the win side. And if Bitcoin does close around here and were to gain, something like 25%, again, keeping in mind that there is variance within these numbers, that could put Bitcoin on significantly new all-time highs. We're talking about $135,000 US. Again, expect variance within these numbers, but when we go into the data here, you can see that pretty much all of the winning Junes. Hey, what's going on here? Oh, yes. Okay. All of the winning Junes are in double digits, or actually more in some, not more than double digits, but, double digits or like deep double digits in terms of returns. There's only one time where June has been a winning month, and it was actually just in 2 times where it has been a winning month and had single digit returns in the positive direction, that being about 679 in, I think that was 2014 or 2015. And then you got 207 a few years later. So those were the lowest ones. Other than that, pretty high, actually, to be fair. Anyways, on the other side, if Bitcoin were to essentially close negatively for June, what could we expect, or what should we generally be preparing for? Well, the average loss at about 15.5% and the median loss at just under 11%. Again, assuming Bitcoin closed somewhere around here by Saturday. What would that look like? Well, 11% to the downside puts Bitcoin where? That puts Bitcoin at about 96-ish thousand. If it went for the actual average, again, understanding that there is variance within these, we could be looking at, low 90s essentially. And again, going to the data right here, we do see a drastic assortment of negative returns for those losing June. So, the first major losing June here was literally the first June in Bitcoin's history. And that one lost 37.25%. And then of course you got this one, this was about 5 or 6 years ago. And this one losing about 24.25%. Other than that, it really hasn't been that bad. We're talking about mid-single digit losses to as much as 15%. So, again, putting those numbers together, probably the real average is a little bit less. Anyways, that would be both the positive and the negative side. But now what I'm a lot more interested in answering the question of when and also where. Well, first we should go over when Bitcoin June lows have typically come in. And this data has actually been surprisingly accurate. In fact, it's the one piece of data that I really did not expect to be so accurate since we started recording this, but it really has been one of the most accurate in terms of getting about when you should be expecting the low of the month. If you recall for May, the low lows in May for positive closing Mays were typically extremely early within the month. In fact, May had the most occurrences of the low coming in on the first day of May for positive closing Mays than any other month that we've seen thus far. Now, June is actually significantly different. We can see that the average for when the low typically comes in on June for positive closing months is actually on day number 7. So that is a little bit later than what we typically do see. And you can see actually a lot of these lows in June come, even for the positive closing Junes, by the way, they come in actually around the end of the second week of June. So we're not seeing what we typically see on this data, which is usually very, very early within the month. This one's actually coming in many cases, in fact, 1, 2, 3 times almost near the end of the second week. So the month was, nearly halfway over, and you didn't have your low until about then. On the other side, for the negative closing Junes, we have seen the low come in actually not super late within the month. Only one time did we even see June hit the lowest price of the month on the last day. That would be 2013. Other than that, it's typically coming in around about the third week, a little bit before, a little bit after, but around that third week, let's say, give or take a couple days. So that puts us at around 23 and a half days. Again, answering the question of when, well, if you are bullish, you're probably looking somewhere between the end of the first week and the end of the second week. So between 7 to 14, somewhere around there, it's probably where you're looking for. That does imply that in the short term, you would be expecting a pullback, even if Bitcoin is going to close June positively. And of course, if we do see like a massively negatively closing June, or just a negative closing June at all, we expect that low to come in, probably most likely after the third week. So again, putting this into context, this data is certainly different than what we saw in May. In May, it was very, 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 very close to I think the third day of May. This one coming in significantly after that. And again, when you actually parse through the data, you see that the lows coming in for even those positive closing Junes were coming in, much later than any other month that I can recall in recent memory. Now, on top of that, we like to look at the not Bitcoin January, but Bitcoin June open to low data. That one's just left in there from a prior one, but I can assure you this is the proper data right here. I literally just went through it this morning, so these numbers are indeed correct for June. Anyways, now we're going to be looking at the open to the low of the month. So the open of the month is literally just it's going to be the close of May, and then the low of the month is just whatever price was the lowest of the month. And then I'm going to bifurcate this data in the exact same way that I did before for the other pieces of data between positive closing Junes and then negative closing Junes. So when we've seen a positive closing June, the differential between the open and low was actually, dare I say, kind of high. Well, I guess it's not that high when you think about it, but at about 7.5% almost, or 738 right here. So even when June has closed positively, we've seen on average a almost 7.5% move to the downside before that month closed, at some point in the month. And as you can see over here from the Bitcoin June lows dates, that probably happens within the first week or two, somewhere around there. Or sorry, I should actually say closer to the end of the second week, in fact. I'd also like to look at the median for this data. So let's just actually see this really quickly. I probably should have prepared this beforehand, but I'm just very, 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 very curious right here. It's actually, okay, it's very, very similar, very, very similar. Let's do the same thing for this one as well. It's just good practice to have. And actually very, very similar as well. So shit, I just did for having an election. What I mean by this is actually negative. That's what I actually mean. That's what this data represents right here. Again, very much in a rush this morning. Anyways, yes. Okay. So like I said, even if Bitcoin does close green in June, we do expect, almost close to a 10% move to the downside. So again, I'm going to assume, and this can always be terrible to assume, so we'll know the real numbers by the end of May on Saturday, but I'm going to assume that things close somewhere around here. And if Bitcoin were to play out about 7.5% to the downside, where would that put Bitcoin? That would put Bitcoin at about $100,000, which is going to come up a little bit later. Like, keep that number in the back of your mind's eye, because we will come back to it. In fact, I'm going to mark it off on the chart right here. I'm just going to mark it off with this. Okay, that's kind of what you would expect, somewhere around there, give or take a little bit from that number. Again, there's going to be variance within this, but it is interesting to see that both the average and the median are, quite close to each other. On the other end, for negative closing Junes, obviously that number is going to be, much, 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 much greater. That closer to, let's just call it 22.5% or 23%. So if Bitcoin were to potentially have a negative June, which I think is maybe a little bit less likely, but on average, you'd expect to move. I mean, again, if Bitcoin closes here, that would be, mid 80s. I think that's a little bit less likely, or at least if something like that's going on, then the whole model of this market, I think, starts to really look a lot different. It really does start to look like a major macro top. But I'm a little bit less biased against that, even though I have been saying, and I do think that there is still a greater likelihood of a short-term pullback, despite all of this. But that's not the same thing as like a fucking 22% move, obviously. Anyways, yes. So I'll mark off that one as well, just so we can reference it later, but a little bit less important. Anyways, going back into it here, again, just want to reference this data and state that, hey, if I am going to be creating a plan to buy Bitcoin in June, I'm actually not that much in a rush to do it. I won't be doing it until at least the first week is over. And I'd want to see like a little bit of a downside move. Keep in mind that if Bitcoin were to, again, have a green June month, and it did come down about, 7.5%, that would put Bitcoin basically at around $100,000. You can imagine that would effectively be a reconnect with this red moving average. That's the 5 EMA, which Bitcoin nearly reconnects with that moving average on nearly every month. And anytime that does not reconnect with it, typically Bitcoin ain't trading, very far away from that prior month's close, both the upside or the downside. You can see this one over here. It did not reconnect, and then the next month, Bitcoin, more or less just played out what was a big range, but it was a range until it did, of course, reconnect over here, and then same thing over here as well. Big move up, didn't reconnect on the next monthly, did on the one that followed that. So, if Bitcoin were to come back down around here, you could effectively look at this as a reconnect with that 5 EMA, and that's kind of where you would be expecting, things to get picked up and marched back on if things are going to be bullish, obviously. Anyways, moving on top of that, I do want to again state that in the more, I guess, short term relative to that, I do think that Bitcoin is likely to play out a pullback. But as we have been saying on this channel for a while now, until Bitcoin breaks on a closing basis, the most recent price action pivot, which in this case is still 106,500, again, needs to be closed below on a daily time frame. These downside areas of interest are not very relevant. Now, Bitcoin got very, very close to that number, both yesterday and even this morning as well, but it did not close below there, more importantly. So these are still not actionable in the way that they, in the way that I'm kind of presenting them. But if and when Bitcoin does do that, that's when I think that you do have, a very high probability move, at least somewhere down to like the very low 100s. Maybe it even dips a little bit below 100,000. It could, again, these numbers are based off of averages. So you're going to see some variance in there, but, whether it's a few more percent, or, either which way, it's probably not going to make a humongous amount of difference. But on the topic of a likely pullback here, I still want to acknowledge that, yes, pretty much all higher term timeframes are positioned for, some downside momentum. We can see daily timeframe right here will be continuing with downside momentum as long as Bitcoin's closing below 108, 100, which to be fair is really not that far away from current price action. So it could easily actually cross back up today. We'll see what things close at, but that's going to be combined with the 2-day timeframe, which is closing tomorrow night alongside the weekly for CME. And that one's going to be headed down as long as Bitcoin's basically below the current all-time high at 111,550. The 3-day timeframe also coming down as long as Bitcoin's below 110,000. The 5-day time frame is going to potentially cross the downside, by the way, if Bitcoin closed below 106. That 106 number very close to the most recent daily price action pivot, in this case, this low right here. So that one's a little bit higher. So I do imagine that if the daily price action pivot does get taken out, you're going to see the 5-day very likely follow through as well. So then you have the daily, 2-day, 3-day, 5-day all working with each other. And that's within the context of the weekly and the other higher term timeframes, getting some pretty critical territory here. So, can Bitcoin open up on a bit of a correction in June and still remain bullish? Yeah, absolutely. And especially after, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 weeks of straight fucking green dildo action, I don't think it's, I don't think it's like too crazy to suggest that a pullback here is a little bit more likely than just continuation of massively new all-time highs. Of course, I can be massively wrong about that, as always. And you will know that I'm massively wrong about this if you do see Bitcoin close above Tuesday's high, this past Tuesday. That, by the way, is 110,745. So as long as Bitcoin's below there, yeah, I do favor a little bit of a pullback. But if Bitcoin does pop back above there, well, fair enough. I guess new highs to 115 or 120 or who the fuck knows after that. Anyways, yes. So we spoke about that. We spoke about how to validate that move. Okay. What about the HPDR here? I just want to show the correlation between the HPDR median, which is just around $100,000, and again, those areas of interest that we spoke about over here regarding Bitcoin, on a pullback somewhere around very low $100,000. So we see this now pop up in multiple different directions. So I do think that holds some weight, at least for an area of interest. I'd at minimum be expecting a bounce right there. If Bitcoin is bullish, probably even a low. And we'll come back to it, if and when it does happen, and, extrapolate on that, I suppose. Last things last here. I do want to bring you over to the most recent MetaSignal setup because it has fired off for Ethereum. And while it's not necessarily Bitcoin, which I typically like to cover on this channel, of course, I know a lot of people are interested in Ethereum, and it is, the typically considered the number 2 in this market. Anyways, this particular setup is on a 4-hour time frame. It fired off at 2762, and it is actually having target number 1 at 2822, target number 2 at 2946, target number 3 at 3224, which at some point, I really do think that Ethereum will get into probably target number 3. I don't know if it's going to happen from this setup right here. I do want to acknowledge that this strategy in particular is a 4 power. So these are not as good as the ones that we have seen earlier on this channel. The ones that we saw earlier on this channel, especially throughout the month of April and May, were very, very high powered ones, which were these ones are considered like the 1 power essentially. So you see a 1 there instead of a 4. So the higher the number, the less likely it is to play out. Anyways, to go over just straight up probabilities, target number 1 does have a probability of 71 and 20. Target number 2 does have a probability of just under 54%, and target number 3 has a probability of just under 32.5%. These ones taking 4.5, 8.5, and almost 29 bars respectively. So if you do see that target number 3, I mean that can be some time, right? That would be I don't know, like a week or 2 out. No, that'd be like a week out, right? 28 4-hour bars. No, I'm doing something wrong here. My brain isn't working anyways. But let's just see. What would 28 bars look like? That would be actually, wait, what the fuck? Oh no, I'm on it. I'm actually retarded today. That is crazy. 24, let's try this again. Or 28. That would put you first week of June, which I do think is less likely. Like I said, even if you're super, super bullish, June is, likely to experience at least a little bit of downside. So fair enough. Anyways, there is a new promo, or a new something with MetaSignals. They're actually offering 50% off of the first 30 days of their service, so you can get access to all of their suite of signals for all of these nameless shitcoins and more. Which maybe you're interested, maybe you're not, but definitely for Bitcoin, which we've shown many on this channel as well. And then on top of that, you can actually get some shitcoins alongside of it as well. You can get some order tokens as they're teaming up with the new kid on the block when it comes to DEXs. That's actually the Wolf of Poloniex' baby right now, and that will actually at current numbers be worth about $100. So if you're all looking for that, check it out. They'll hook you up over there. There's even a special code for this channel using Crown in all capitals that'll get you 10% off of the whole damn thing already. So there you go. You got tokens, you got discounts, you got all sorts of shit, and most importantly, you got the setups over here as well. So anyways, that's where I'm going to leave things off for today. By the way, just as an aside, Ethereum in the short term looks like it wants to take the reins of the market for a little bit, while Bitcoin kind of cools off. But yeah, that's where we're going to end things for today. As always, I'm going to wish everyone the best. Take care, much love, and see you hopefully Friday.